I'm 19 now, and last year I got what felt like the biggest break of my life, a full-ride scholarship to my state university. It covers everything: tuition, housing, books, and even gives me a little stipend every month so I can actually afford food and other basics. It wasn't just any scholarship, either. My grandfather on my mom's side spent 4 decades teaching at that university, and before he died when I was 15, he created this fund so students like me could have a chance. The fact that I get to use it makes me feel like I'm carrying on his legacy. My family life, though, hasn't been nearly as steady as that scholarship. My parents' marriage fell apart right as I was hitting my teenage years. They split when I was 14, officially divorced the next year, and all of that chaos happened just months after my grandfather passed away. Their relationship had always been tense, but losing him seemed to push everything over the edge. Dad worked construction and was gone for long stretches, chasing jobs wherever he could find them. Mom used to be a receptionist at a doctor's office, but she was laid off when I was 11 and never found steady work again. So whenever Dad came home, it was like the same fight was waiting for them. She'd say we didn't even have enough money to pay the bills, and he'd snap back that he was busting his back 60 hours a week just to keep a roof over our heads. As soon as voices started to rise, I'd slip away to my room, throw on my headphones, and tune it all out. By freshman year of high school, I'd figured out how to avoid being around for the worst of it. I'd stay late at school, joining study groups or clubs, just to miss dinner. Sometimes Mom would leave me a plate in the microwave, and sometimes the kitchen would be empty. The house never really felt like home anymore, it was more like a place I tried not to be. Eventually, things blew up. I'll never forget the night I came home and found Dad packing a duffel bag. He didn't even look at me, just stormed past and disappeared for a week. When he finally came back, it was only to grab more of his stuff. A few days later, I heard he had signed a lease on an apartment across town. The divorce dragged on for months. Money was tight, Dad's work had slowed down, and Mom still didn't have any income. They fought over everything: the house, the car, the tiny amount of savings they had. What hurt the most, though, was realizing that they weren't fighting for me. I was just left out of the conversation, like an afterthought. Most weekends, I escaped to my grandma's house, Dad's mom, who lived 20 minutes away. She'd pick me up Friday after school and bring me back Sunday night. Sometimes, when I came home, Mom was still in the same spot on the couch as when I left, staring at nothing. Other times, she wasn't home at all. Once the divorce was finalized, Mom kept the house but had to get a job to afford the mortgage. She started working as a cashier at a grocery store, long hours, bad pay, but it was at least something. Dad was ordered to pay child support, but his work was so unstable that checks showed up late or didn't come at all. Grandma even suggested I move in with her, but Mom shot that down immediately. She said it would look bad if her own son wasn't living with her. So I stayed in my old bedroom, even though I spent as little time there as possible. By the time I turned 17, things had started to settle. Dad's construction jobs picked up, and he was finally more consistent with support payments. Mom had been promoted to assistant manager at the store, which seemed to take some weight off her shoulders. They even started talking to each other again when Dad dropped off checks in person. Then came graduation. Not only was I done with high school, but I got the official confirmation that I'd secured my grandfather's scholarship. For years fully paid, as long as I kept my GPA above 3.5. On top of that, the stipend meant I could focus on my classes instead of worrying about a job. I was planning to study engineering, the same subject my grandfather had dedicated his career to. The weekend after graduation, my parents asked me to dinner. I assumed it was just to celebrate. But when I walked into the restaurant, I immediately noticed they were sitting together at the table, holding hands. That alone was shocking enough. Then they dropped the bomb: they had been seeing each other again for 6 months and were planning to renew their vows during my winter break. I congratulated them, but before I could even process what they were saying, they hit me with something else. They wanted me to contribute to the wedding costs, specifically, to take money from my scholarship stipend. The whole thing was going to cost around $15,000, and they expected me to cover $5,000 of it. I tried to explain that the stipend was meant for my living expenses while in school, not for funding a party. My dad brushed it off, saying I'd be living in the dorms with a meal plan, so what else could I possibly need? Mom piled on, reminding me they'd supported me for 18 years and now it was my turn to give back. I told them the truth, that the scholarship existed because of my grandfather, and using it for something like this would completely go against his wishes. Dad waved his hand like it was no big deal, saying Grandpa wouldn't have minded if part of it went toward a family celebration. When I still refused, Mom's whole expression shifted. She accused me of being selfish since getting the scholarship, of acting like I was suddenly better than them because I was going to college. Dad added that they had sacrificed everything for me, and now I couldn't even help them celebrate their reunion. I didn't argue. I just stood up, left the restaurant, and walked the 2 miles back to Grandma's house, where I'd been staying since graduation. When I told her what happened, she just shook her head like it was exactly what she expected. She reminded me that I was welcome with her until I had to move into the dorms. The next day, both my parents called and texted nonstop. I ignored them. Mom left a voicemail saying I was acting like a child and that we needed to talk like adults. Dad sent a message saying I owed them this much after all they'd done. A week later, my uncle invited the whole family to a barbecue. I didn't want to go, but Grandma convinced me it was better to face my parents in public instead of avoiding them completely. At first, everything was fine. My uncle was flipping burgers, cousins were playing volleyball, Dad was helping with the grill, and Mom was laughing with her sister. I stuck close to Grandma and made small talk. But then, as everyone sat down for dinner at the picnic tables, Mom stood up to make an announcement. She proudly said that she and Dad had officially set a date for their vow renewal. Everyone clapped, offered congratulations. Then, with a pointed look at me, she added that the budget was tight because someone who had recently come into money refused to help his parents celebrate their love. The entire table went silent. Grandma reached for my arm, but I pulled away and stood. I told everyone the truth, that Mom was talking about my scholarship money, which was supposed to be used for my education and basic living needs. Dad immediately cut in, insisting it wasn't the entire scholarship, just part of the stipend that I didn't really need. The second my mom threw that jab about me refusing to help my own parents, my uncle stepped in. He was my grandfather's son, and honestly, he's always been one of the few people in the family who truly has my back. He immediately asked if they were seriously talking about the scholarship fund, the one my grandfather had spent his life building before he passed. When my mom nodded and confirmed that yes, that was exactly what she meant, I thought my uncle was going to explode. His face went red, and he told them point blank that it was absolutely out of line to pressure me into spending that money on anything other than my education. But my mom didn't back down. She started going on about how family should help family and that since my tuition and housing were already covered, I should be more than willing to share my good fortune. My dad joined in, saying they weren't asking for much, just a small contribution toward their big day. That's when my grandma cut in. And let me tell you, she does not mince words. She reminded everyone right there at the table that during the divorce, my parents had barely paid attention to me at all. She flat out said they hadn't put a single dollar aside for my college education, while my grandfather had literally set up the scholarship fund for the sole purpose of helping his grandchildren. The entire backyard went dead quiet except for the sound of kids playing volleyball. Then the arguing started. My parents accused Grandma and my uncle of turning me against them. Other relatives began taking sides. It got loud and uncomfortable fast. I just sat there watching the mess unfold, and eventually, my parents stormed out. My mom shouted over her shoulder that I was ungrateful and that one day I'd regret this decision. A week later, I got a text from my dad. He told me that if I didn't reconsider, then I shouldn't even bother coming to their vow renewal. He also added that they had been planning to offer me my old room during summer breaks, but now I'd need to make other arrangements. I texted back that I'd already planned on staying with my grandma anyway and wished them luck with their ceremony. Then I told him, one last time, that my decision about the scholarship money was final. 2 days later, Mom sent a novel-length message. She talked about how she had given up her youth and career dreams to raise me, and how Dad had worked himself to the bone just to provide for us. She told me that the very least I could do was help them have one perfect day together. She ended her rant with a dagger, saying my grandfather would be ashamed of how selfish I'd become. I didn't answer her. At that point, I was done with the guilt trips. Instead, I focused on getting ready to move into the dorms. Grandma helped me buy everything I needed and promised she'd be the one to take me to campus. The night before move-in, though, my parents showed up unannounced at Grandma's place. Dad demanded to talk to me alone, but Grandma refused to leave the room. That's when Mom started crying, saying they just wanted one perfect day to make up for all the mistakes they'd made. Dad chimed in again about how $5,000 was nothing compared to the $80,000 plus that the scholarship covered. I told them, calmly but firmly, the same thing I had said a dozen times before: the scholarship was for my education, period. I wasn't about to disrespect my grandfather's memory by using it for anything else. Dad's face twisted, and he snapped that I was stubborn and selfish, just like your grandfather. Mom added that I clearly didn't care about their happiness. And when I still didn't budge, Dad slammed the door so hard the walls shook as they left. The next morning, Grandma drove me to school. As we unpacked boxes into my new dorm room, she told me I had done the right thing. She said my grandfather would have been proud of me for standing firm and not letting anyone misuse the gift he'd left behind. My first semester went well. Every once in a while, I get texts from Mom, usually little updates about their vow renewal plans. She never mentioned the scholarship directly anymore, but but she would slip in lines about how they were downsizing or how certain things were too expensive now. I kept my responses short and polite, never opening the door for more guilt. Dad barely reached out at all, except once to ask about Thanksgiving. When I told him I'd be spending it with Grandma, his reply was just one word: typical. By the end of the semester, I was thriving. I finished with a 3.8 GPA, made the dean's list, and even joined the robotics club that competes in regional tournaments. Meanwhile, my parents did go through with the vow renewal, but it looked nothing like what they'd been bragging about months earlier. I didn't go, obviously, but I saw the photos on Facebook. They'd rented a small event hall at a hotel instead of the fancy country club they'd originally wanted. The plated dinner service they had described to me was replaced with a buffet. Maybe 30 people showed up total, mostly Mom's co-workers from the grocery store and some of Dad's construction buddies. Not a single grandparent, aunt, or uncle was there. When I came back to Grandma's house for winter break, she showed me the pictures herself. She admitted that Mom had sent her a last-minute invite but said she refused out of respect for me. I told her she didn't have to do that, but she shook her head and said her decision was final. A few days into break, my parents turned up again. This time, they came bearing a Christmas gift, a watch that looked expensive. Dad pointed out it was the same brand Grandpa used to wear, and Mom explained how they'd saved for months to afford it, even with all the costs of the vow renewal. They stayed about an hour, making awkward small talk about my classes and their jobs. But just before they left, Mom hugged me and whispered in my ear that they had put money down on a rental property as an investment. She admitted they were struggling to make the first mortgage payment and hinted that maybe I could help them out just as a loan until the place started making money. I stepped back and told her clearly, I wasn't giving them a dime of my scholarship stipend. Dad's face turned bright red, and he looked like he was about to explode, but Mom placed a hand on his arm and shook her head. Without another word, they left. That night, Grandma told me something she'd been holding back. For weeks, my parents had been calling her, begging her to convince me to hand over part of the scholarship money. She said she refused every time, but she hadn't told me because she didn't want to ruin my break. Going back to campus after winter break was like a breath of fresh air. The distance made everything easier. I even picked up a part-time job for about 10 hours a week, just to have spending money that had nothing to do with the scholarship. Mom still texted occasionally, usually sending me pictures of her and Dad eating out or lounging on the couch. Sometimes she'd throw in comments about sacrifices they were making or how they were cutting back. I kept my replies polite but short. Dad? He barely texted at all. On my 19th birthday in February, he sent me a 2-word message, "Happy birthday." I texted back, "Thanks." He never responded. By the end of my freshman year, I honestly felt like I was finally stepping into the life my grandfather had dreamed for me. I pulled off a 3.85 GPA, and on top of that, I landed a paid summer internship with an engineering firm near campus. For once, money wasn't terrifying. Between the stipend and the internship paycheck, I could afford to breathe a little, even save. That's why I made the choice not to go home for the summer. I split a small apartment with a classmate who also had an internship in town. My grandma was nothing but supportive. She's visited me twice already, each time bringing food and reminding me how proud my grandfather would have been. My parents, on the other hand, did a complete 180. After practically ignoring me for months, suddenly they started blowing up my phone once they learned I wasn't coming home. My mom claimed they had been planning a family vacation to heal the wounds from the past year. My dad said they'd been fixing up my old room, expecting me to stay there. When I told them I'd already signed a lease and was committed to my internship, Dad accused me of deliberately avoiding them. Mom chimed in that Grandma had always hated her and was clearly turning me against them. I reminded them point blank, they were the ones who told me before that I wasn't welcome in their house unless I contributed money. They swore they never said that, like I just made it up. It got worse. One evening I came home from my internship and found my parents inside my apartment. They had tracked down my address through one of my friends and convinced my roommate to let them in. By the time I walked in, they were sitting in my living room like they owned the place. My mom had brought over containers of home-cooked food like that was supposed to fix everything. My dad was pacing around, checking out the apartment and making comments about repairs it needed, like he was some kind of landlord. They ended up staying for 3 hours. And the entire time, the topic was money. Their rental property was bleeding them dry. Appliances had broken, the water heater went out, and they were up to their necks in credit card debt. Dad whipped out his phone to show me photos of all the work he'd done to save costs. Mom kept sighing about how unfair it all was. Before leaving, Mom hugged me tight and slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. When I opened it later, it was a bank account number with a note that said, "Anything you can spare will help." I gave it straight back to her and told her again that my scholarship money was for school and nothing else. Dad just shook his head and muttered, "You're turning into one of those academic types who doesn't understand the real world." Then they left. After they were gone, my roommate turned to me and asked if they were always like that. When I asked what he meant, he said they had spent the entire time waiting for me talking about their financial problems and even asked him if he knew how much my scholarship stipend was. I felt sick. 2 weeks later, it escalated again. I got an email from the university's financial aid office saying someone had called pretending to be me, trying to get details about my scholarship payment schedule. When they couldn't answer the verification questions, they hung up. The officer emailed me just to confirm it wasn't me and reminded me not to share my student ID or banking information. The second I read that, I knew it was them. I called Grandma immediately and asked if she'd seen them. She told me they had actually stopped by her place the weekend before, asking her detailed questions about the scholarship, like whether there were emergency clauses that would allow me to pull extra funds. She said she kicked them out on the spot and tried to call me, but I'd missed it. That's when I realized I needed to protect myself. I went to the financial aid office in person, explained everything, and asked what protections were in place. They reassured me that the tuition and housing portion of the scholarship went directly into my student account, and only the stipend went into my bank. They added extra security measures so no one could change anything without me showing up with an ID. Then I went straight to my bank. I opened a brand new account at an entirely different bank, moved all my savings, and had both my stipend and internship paychecks redirected there. I didn't tell my parents a word. 2 days later, Mom called me, sounding panicked. She said Dad had gotten hurt at work and needed surgery, but their insurance wouldn't cover everything. She said they needed $7,000 and had no one else to turn to. When I told her I was sorry to hear that but I couldn't give them my scholarship money, she broke. That's when she admitted it, they were the ones who had called the financial aid office pretending to be me. She said they were desperate and knew I wouldn't help otherwise. She promised they would pay back every penny once the rental property started generating income. That was my breaking point. I told her straight, what they had done was fraud. They could have destroyed my scholarship, the one thing giving me a future. I told her I had already secured all of my accounts and that if they tried anything like that again, I would have no choice but to involve the police. She sobbed and handed the phone to Dad. He didn't apologize. Instead, he started yelling, telling me I was a disgrace, that I had no family loyalty, and that threatening legal action against my own parents proved I didn't care about them at all. After that, I blocked them. Every number, every email. Gone. I went to student services on campus and spoke with a counselor, who helped me come up with a plan for moving forward without any contact with my parents. For the first time, I felt like I had a safety net that didn't involve them. Now I'm continuing my internship, saving money, and focusing on school. Grandma checks in regularly, and she even reached out to some of my grandfather's old colleagues to make sure that no matter what my parents try, my scholarship will remain untouchable. It hurts knowing my own parents would lie, manipulate, and even commit fraud just to get their hands on my scholarship money. But at the same time, I'm finally starting to accept that the only family I can truly rely on is the one that actually respects me, not the ones who see me as a bank account.